Hey guys, Ponce here, and I thought I'd make a bit of an addendum about the previous video I just did, the overpowered classes thing or overpowered champions thing. So that'll be linked to in the description. In the description of the original video, it'll link to this, since I seem to get a lot of questions about sort of the various things I was talking about. Also, I didn't really get to everything I want to talk about, so this will be a shorter video, but I'm just going to go over and clarify some things. First off, basically, I just kind of wanted to say the previous, I made a couple sort of lists about champions I thought was overpowered. That wasn't meant to be an all-inclusive thing. There may be more out there. In fact, there probably are. Um, it's just I didn't want to talk about everything. If I didn't include something, either I just don't play it, or I didn't really know enough about it, so I don't want to say anything, or just I didn't want to talk about it because I can't talk about every champion. There wasn't going to be enough time. The video was 30 minutes as is. But I just thought I'd reiterate the fact that that wasn't really the point of the video. The specific champions I'm talking about that I think are overpowered are not as relevant as the point of what makes an overpowered champion. So you remember from that previous video, I was talking about damage and the various forms that comes in, tankiness and the various forms that takes, and the importance of mobility, CC, and utility. Um, and that was sort of more so the point. And basically, to make that even more simple and really kind of boil that concept down, really all it comes down to is basically, is the champion really, really good at, or is it really, really easy to kill people on that champion? And is that champion really, really hard to kill? Think of it as two bars. You got your tankiness bar or survivability bar, and you have your ability to do damage bar. The higher you get both those bars, or we should call it ability to kill people, because you can have really high damage if you get kited all day, then it doesn't matter. But if you get both those bars, what you're trying to do is max out those bars as much as possible. Imagine like a champion with AD carry or AP carry class damage, and then imagine giving him tank class survivability. It doesn't need to come from raw stats. Personally, I like raw stats, like high HP, high armor, and stuff, because it's much more reliable, and you just kind of walk forward, and it doesn't matter if you're lagging or as much. You have to do crazy plays, just walk forward and you survive. But yeah, imagine a champion like that that can do both things: survive like a tank and kill people like an AD carry. Right now in League of Legends, there's nothing really like that. There were in the past, but that's as close as you can get is what you want to be shooting for, and the closer you get to that ideal, the more overpowered said champion will become. Um, Notice, incidentally, you guys probably have heard, people complain about tanky DPS through various points of League of Legends history. Notice that's a kind of a recurring theme. Tanky DPS tends to be kind of problematic. Not just League of Legends. Pretty much any game, tanky DPS is always really good. Um, so just that's a bit of a side point there. One thing specifically I'd like to comment on is I'm noticing a lot of people in my comments talking about various champions and saying they're overpowered, while not considering sort of power curve and power scaling in particular champions that are like really, really good early but not so good late, like LeBlanc or something. What I would more so, the other point I really wanted to get to was consistency. Like, you have to be consistent all throughout. To be considered overpowered, in my opinion, you have to be consistent throughout the entire game and just like really good throughout the entire. Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's early, late, whatever. Um, because yeah, consistency. I mentioned this in the previous video. That's a very important concept. It's all you really need. In because we're talking about solo queue, remember, not more high level team players, things with more coordination. Um, Solo queue is, to put it mildly, clusterfuck. So you get something that's very basically good, and it wins more than it loses. And the better you are at that, the more overpowered you become. Um, and here's a kind of point that I didn't actually get to go over in the previous video. This is something new. Historically in League of Legends, sustain has been a very problematic stat to balance, and it's often quite exploitable to the people who catch onto it early before sort of Riot gets things much more correct. In terms of sustain, Riot seems to be a lot better than they used to be about dealing with that stat. There hasn't been anything too bad like really recently. But think back to, old Vlad. Do you remember how many times that guy was nerfed, buffed, and or, well, not really buffed. He was mostly just nerfed, but kind of just changed around and whatever. There was a cycle of about, I don't know, 6 patches where Vlad was just kind of all over the place because they couldn't really figure out what to do with his sustain, because sustain makes champions very problematic. I think there was a bunch of riot posts about that. They said it themselves. The same thing happened with Mordekaiser. If you remember way back then, Mordekaiser had a series of a whole bunch of patches where he was just kind of all over the place, up and down, because he was so sustainy. In his case, it wasn't even spell vamp sustain. It was just like his shield, which is a kind of sustain. Also think back to Aurelia. Aurelia was just kind of nerfed over and over and over again for a while. Although obviously Aurelia wasn't, sustain alone wasn't her issue. The problem was she had like everything, but sustain was definitely in the mix. There was also the fact that she had weird damage types and true damage. And incidentally, true damage is another thing you want to look for. It's kind of like percent damage, in that's a very important damage type. Um, Although Riot seems to be a lot more careful about true damage, so usually it's not quite as exploitable. Probably the worst case of a sort of a recent-ish case of sustain being problematic was Release Rengar. You guys remember Release Rengar and his percent heal that he casted on himself? So that's like the whole dreaded. Remember, I was talking about awesome percent damages. Well, so is percent healing. I mean, all Rengar had to do is used his innate damage, got stupid tanky, and then just percent healed himself all day, and he was unkillable. That was pretty insane. I don't really know how Rengar made it out of the gates like that. Notice when I say percent heal, Zac has that as well. So you're sort of seeing shades of that in Zac. He's not as bad as Release Rengar, in my opinion, anyway. But of course, I did mention Zac in the previous video when I'm talking about overpowered champions. I don't think you can really argue that one too much. At least I don't think you can. Maybe you guys can. I don't know. But yeah, that's all we really have to say about sustain. And one very kind of last point, I'm going to end on something that I probably shouldn't have again because it's like talking about inaccuracies. But in the previous video, I probably shouldn't have included Rengar and Hecarim in sort of that overpowered tanky kind of class of list. They're both very, very borderline cases, especially Hecarim after he's been nerfed so many times. They're still very, very good champions, and they're very solid. In fact, I play both of them. I mean, I wouldn't play these champions if I didn't think they were good. But I'm not sure if they deserve to hang in the class of the other champions I mentioned, like Zac and Elise and Ari and even Jarvan, really. But yeah, that's all I have to say on the matter. If I can think of something else to say, or if there's any more questions that like need to get addressed, maybe I'll make a third video. I don't, probably not. But yeah, hopefully you guys found this informative and or possibly entertaining. It's been Ponce. See you guys around, and I'll go back to my live stream pretty soon. Goodbye.